You need to understand, blocking someone is not revenge. It is reclaiming emotional safety when access has been abused, and that difference matters more than you realize. Because when you've loved someone who moves in and out of your life like a revolving door, who appears when it's convenient and disappears when it's uncomfortable, your nervous system slowly starts living in a state of tension. You tell yourself you're fine. You tell yourself you're strong. You tell yourself you're patient. But your body knows the truth. Your body knows what it feels like to wait for a message that may or may not come. Your body knows the tightness in your chest when you see their name light up your screen after days of silence. Your body knows the drop in your stomach when they pull away again just as you begin to feel close. And for a long time, you tolerate it because you love them. You understand their fears. You tell yourself they've been hurt before. You tell yourself they just need space. You tell yourself you can be the safe place they've never had. But you need to understand, there is a difference between being compassionate and being emotionally unprotected. There is a difference between loving someone and leaving your heart exposed to repeated harm. And when access is constantly abused, when your availability is treated like a revolving privilege instead of a sacred space, something inside you begins to erode. You don't notice it at first. It's subtle. You start checking your phone more often. You start rereading conversations. You start analyzing tone. You start crafting messages carefully so you don't scare them away. You become smaller in your needs, quieter in your expectations, softer in your standards. You convince yourself that this is maturity, that this is patience, that this is what strong love looks like, but what it actually is you bending yourself to fit inside someone else's fear. You need to understand when you finally block them, it is not about making them feel pain. It is about stopping your own. It is the moment you look at the pattern honestly and say, this is costing me too much. It is the moment you realize that every time they come back without change, you reopen a wound that barely had time to close. It is the moment you accept that leaving the door open is not kindness. It is self-betrayal. Because access is powerful. Access means they can reach you whenever loneliness hits. Access means they can check on you without committing to you. Access means they can send a message at midnight when they feel empty, and you will respond because your heart is still attached. And as long as that access exists, the cycle can continue. They do not have to confront the full loss of you. They do not have to face the consequences of distance. They do not have to sit with the silence they created. But when you block them, you change the rules. You remove the safety net. You remove the emotional convenience. And yes, it feels intense because it is decisive. It is a boundary that cannot be half kept. It is a line that cannot be blurred. It is you saying, I will not allow my heart to be on standby anymore. You need to understand this deeply. Blocking is not about control. It is about safety. It is about giving your nervous system a chance to breathe. It is about waking up without the anxiety of whether today will be a good day or a silent one. It is about breaking the habit of checking their status, their stories, their last scene. It is about interrupting the addiction of hope, because hope can be dangerous when it is attached to inconsistency. Hope makes you wait. Hope makes you excuse. Hope makes you stay longer than you should. And when someone repeatedly abuses access, hope becomes the chain that keeps you tied to the same emotional roller coaster. So when you block them, you are not being cruel. You are being honest about what your heart can no longer carry. You are being honest about the damage that unpredictability has done to your peace. You are being honest about the fact that love without consistency is not love that feels safe. And here's the part that most people do not talk about. When you block them, you will feel grief. You will miss them. You will question yourself. You will wonder if you overreacted. You will remember their laugh, their voice, the good days, and your mind will try to convince you to reopen the door just to feel close again. But you need to understand, missing someone does not mean you should re-expose yourself to the same pattern. Love does not cancel out damage. Care does not cancel out chaos. Blocking is not the absence of love. It is the presence of self-respect. It is you choosing to prioritize your emotional health over temporary comfort. It is you saying, I deserve stability, I deserve clarity, I deserve consistency, and if someone cannot provide that, they do not get unlimited access to my heart. You need to understand that when access has been abused, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is close the door. Not slam it in anger, not lock it out of spite, but close it with dignity. Close it because you are tired of living in uncertainty. Close it because you are done negotiating your worth. Close it because your peace matters. And when you do, something begins to shift inside you. The constant tension softens. The overthinking slows. The urge to check your phone weakens. The space that once felt empty begins to feel calm. You start hearing your own thoughts again. You start reconnecting with parts of yourself that were overshadowed by anxiety. You block them not to hurt them, but to heal you. You block them not to win, but to protect. You block them because access without respect is not love. It is imbalance. And the moment you chose emotional safety over emotional chaos, you did not become ruthless. You became responsible for your own heart. You need to understand, when you remove access without warning, when you block without a final speech, without a dramatic goodbye, without giving them one more chance to understand, you are not being impulsive. You are interrupting a pattern that depended on your predictability. For so long, they knew exactly how it would go. They would pull back. You would feel it. You would reach out. They would respond just enough to keep you close. The rhythm was familiar. The distance was controlled. The emotional dance always returned to the same place. And in that rhythm, they felt safe, because they knew you would not disappear. You need to understand that avoidant behavior often survives on that certainty. Not certainty of love, but certainty of access. They may fear vulnerability, they may retreat when emotions intensify, they may detach when closeness feels overwhelming, but they still take comfort in knowing you are there. You are reachable, you are available, you are emotionally invested, and as long as you remain reachable, they never have to fully confront what losing you would feel like. They can regulate by distance without consequence. So when you block without warning, you disrupt that control. You remove the emotional safety net they did not even realize they were standing on. You take away the ability to hover at the edge of your life. You remove the casual check-ins, the story views, the late night hey, the subtle reminders that they still exist in your world. And suddenly, they cannot measure your feelings anymore. They cannot test your availability. They cannot confirm that you are still emotionally orbiting them. That is what stuns them. Not because they expected to own you, but because they expected the pattern to continue. They expected your love to override your boundaries like it always had before. They expected your emotions to soften your decisions. They expected time to reopen the door. You need to understand unpredictability is uncomfortable for someone who relies on distance for stability. When you were predictable, when you always responded, when you always explained, when you always reopened the door, they could regulate their closeness without fear of permanent loss. But when you remove access completely, you introduce something they are not used to, uncertainty. And uncertainty creates reflection. Now, they cannot just step back and assume you will still be there. Now, they cannot soothe themselves with the idea that they can return whenever loneliness hits. Now, they must sit with the possibility that you are truly gone. And that is a different emotional experience entirely. You need to understand that your silence becomes louder than any argument you could have made. Your absence becomes clearer than any explanation you could have given. Because when you leave without chaos, without begging, without drama, you communicate something powerful. You communicate that you are no longer negotiating your worth. And here is where your heart may struggle, because when you remove access without warning, you will question yourself. You will wonder if you were too harsh. You will feel the ache of not having the last word. You will miss the familiarity, even if that familiarity was painful. Your attachment will whisper to you that maybe one more conversation could fix it. Maybe one more explanation would make them see. Maybe one more chance would change everything. But you need to understand, the reason you removed access without warning is because you had already warned them in every way that mattered. You warned them through conversations about consistency. You warned them through tears. You warned them through patience. You warned them through the many times you expressed what you needed. The warning was not silent. It was simply ignored. So the block was not sudden. It was the final step after many unacknowledged signals. When you remove access, you are not closing the door out of anger. You are closing it because leaving it open kept hurting you. You are choosing peace over possibility. You are choosing certainty over hope that keeps breaking. You are choosing stability over emotional guessing games. And yes, they may be stunned. They may replay conversations. They may check their phone expecting to still see you there. They may feel the loss of control, the loss of predictability, the loss of easy access. They may even feel regret, not always because they fully understand their role, but because the comfort of your availability is gone. But your decision was never about their shock. It was about your survival. You need to understand that when you finally remove access without warning, you are stepping into a new version of yourself. A version that does not need to explain boundaries to enforce them. A version that understands that clarity does not require consensus. A version that knows emotional safety is not selfish. And here is the deeper truth. When you remove access, you give yourself space to heal without interruption. You give yourself the chance to detach without being pulled back in. You give your nervous system the quiet it has been craving. You give your heart the chance to beat without waiting. Because sometimes closure does not come from a conversation. Sometimes closure comes from a decision. You need to understand that love does not mean endless availability. Compassion does not mean unlimited access. Understanding does not mean self-sacrifice. And when someone repeatedly uses your presence as a comfort while avoiding true intimacy, the most powerful thing you can do is remove the comfort. Not to punish, not to control, but to protect. And when you look back at this moment, when the ache has softened and the clarity has settled, you will see that removing access without warning was not ruthless. It was responsible. It was you finally saying that your heart is not a revolving door. It is not a waiting room. It is not a temporary shelter for someone unsure. It is a space that requires intention. And the moment you chose to protect that space, you did not lose power. You found it. You need to understand your block is not about hurting them. It is about ending the cycle that kept hurting you. And that distinction changes everything. Because when you have been stuck in a pattern with someone who comes close and then retreats, who reaches out and then disappears, who gives just enough to keep you hopeful but never enough to make you secure, you begin to live in emotional fragments. One day you feel chosen, the next day you feel invisible, one week you feel connected, the next week you feel like you imagine the whole thing. That back and forth does not just confuse your mind, it exhausts your heart. You start measuring your worth through their attention. You start calming yourself with their replies. You start questioning yourself when they go quiet. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you said too much, asked for too much, felt too deeply. And slowly, without realizing it, your emotional stability becomes dependent on someone who is not stable with you. You need to understand that this is what a cycle feels like. It feels addictive. It feels intense. It feels like chemistry. But underneath it, there is anxiety, there is uncertainty, there is the constant effort to hold something together that never quite stands on its own. And every time they return, every time they send that message after silence, every time they act sweet after distance, the cycle resets. You feel relief, you feel hope, you feel chosen again, but the foundation never changes. So when you block them, it is not about revenge. It is about breaking repetition. It is about saying, I cannot keep riding this emotional roller coaster and call it love. It is about realizing that every time you reopen the door, you reopen the wound. Because the truth is, you were not blocking them to make them suffer. You were blocking them because you were tired of suffering quietly. You need to understand that cycles survive on access. As long as they can reach you, as long as they can send a message when they feel lonely, as long as they can check if you still care, the pattern stays alive. They do not have to grow. They do not have to reflect deeply. They do not have to confront what their inconsistency has done to you. They can keep testing the waters. They can keep dipping in and out. They can keep taking comfort without offering commitment. And you were the one paying the emotional price. Because every time they returned without real change, you convinced yourself it would be different this time. You told yourself they understood now. You told yourself your patience was finally working. You told yourself love required endurance. But endurance without reciprocity is not romance. It is depletion. You need to understand that breaking a cycle feels painful at first because your nervous system has grown used to it. You are used to the spikes of attention. You are used to the drops of silence. You are used to the rush of relief when they come back. So when you block them, your body feels the absence. It feels the quiet. It feels the withdrawal from the pattern. And part of you will want to go back, not because it was healthy, but because it was familiar. But familiar does not mean safe. When you block them, you remove the option for the cycle to restart. You remove the late-night apology that leads nowhere. You remove the casual check-in that reignites attachment. You remove the I miss you that is not followed by effort. You remove the small openings that kept you emotionally tethered. And that is where your power begins. Because once the cycle is broken, you start seeing clearly. You start recognizing how much of your emotional energy was spent trying to decode someone else's behavior. You start realizing how much anxiety you normalized. You start noticing how often you ignored your own intuition. And that clarity can be uncomfortable because it forces you to admit that you stayed longer than you should have, that you accepted less than you deserved, that you hoped harder than the situation warranted. But you need to understand, clarity is healing. Ending the cycle is not dramatic. It is disciplined. It is not impulsive. It is intentional. It is you saying, I will not continue something that continues to harm me. And sometimes the only way to truly end it is to remove access completely. Because as long as there is a small opening, the cycle can breathe. When you block them, you are not declaring war. You are declaring peace. Peace with yourself. Peace with the fact that love should not feel like emotional gambling. Peace with the truth that someone who wants you will not repeatedly put you in a position to question your place in their life. You need to understand that cycles feel powerful while you are inside them, but once you step out, you realize how small they kept you. You realize how much you bent to accommodate unpredictability. You realize how much you justified behavior that hurt you. And stepping out of that cycle is the first moment you choose stability over intensity. And yes, they may feel the loss. They may feel the absence of your steady presence. They may feel the shock of not being able to return whenever they want. But your decision was never about their reaction. It was about your recovery, because the cycle did not just hurt you once, it hurt you repeatedly. And every time you tolerated it, it chipped away at your self-trust. Ending it restores that trust. It tells your heart that you will no longer allow the same pain to replay. You need to understand that love does not require repetition of hurt. Growth does not come from enduring endless uncertainty, and blocking someone who keeps restarting a painful pattern is not cruelty. It is courage. It is the moment you stop hoping they will change and start changing your response. And that is how cycles truly end. You need to understand self-respect changes your energy so deeply that even silence becomes powerful. And that shift is not something you force. It is something you grow into after you have been tired of shrinking. For a long time, your energy was shaped by waiting. Waiting for replies, waiting for reassurance, waiting for consistency, waiting for them to decide that you mattered enough to show up properly. And when you live in waiting, your energy feels anxious, hopeful, restless. You smile, but part of you is checking your phone. You laugh, but part of you is wondering why they haven't responded. You try to act calm, but inside you are negotiating with uncertainty. Then something changes. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly. You get tired of feeling small in your own life. You get tired of adjusting your tone so you don't seem too much. You get tired of pretending mixed signals are mysterious instead of inconsistent. You get tired of calling emotional distance complicated instead of what it is. And in that exhaustion, self-respect begins to rise. You need to understand that self-respect is not loud. It does not shout. It does not post quotes about power. It does not send long messages explaining boundaries. It simply shifts how you move. It shifts how you respond. It shifts what you tolerate. It changes the look in your eyes when someone offers less than you deserve. And the moment that shift happens, your silence stops being needy and starts being firm. Before, when you were silent, it was heavy. It was full of longing. It was waiting for them to notice. It was hoping they would feel your absence and rush back. That silence was attached. It was emotional. It was pleading without words. But when self-respect steps in, your silence feels different. It feels steady. It feels calm. It feels like a decision, not a strategy. You need to understand that avoidant individuals are sensitive to energy. They may not process emotions openly, but they feel shifts. When your silence no longer carries longing, when your absence no longer feels like a test, when your distance no longer begs to be closed, they sense it. They sense that you are not orbiting them anymore. They sense that you are not waiting in the background. They sense that something fundamental has changed, and that is what stuns them. Because when you were waiting, they had control. They could pull back and know you would still be there. They could take space and trust that your heart was still open. They could return casually, confident that access was intact. But when self-respect changes your energy, access is no longer automatic. It is earned. And the shift from automatic to intentional is powerful. You need to understand that self-respect does not mean you stop loving. It means you stop loving at your own expense. It means you stop sacrificing your peace to preserve someone else's comfort. It means you stop confusing chemistry with compatibility. It means you stop accepting intensity as proof of depth. And when you do that, your whole posture changes. You walk differently. You speak differently. You respond differently. You no longer jump when your phone lights up. You no longer rearrange your schedule at the last minute. You no longer analyze every message for hidden meaning. You are grounded. You are centered. You are not performing calmness, you are calm. And calmness is intimidating to someone who relied on your emotional reactivity. You need to understand that your new energy does not chase. It does not convince. It does not explain endlessly. It does not beg to be understood. It simply exists with standards. It says, if you want me, you meet me fully. If you cannot, you do not get partial access. That shift forces a mirror in front of them, because now they cannot rely on your softness to cushion their inconsistency. They cannot rely on your forgiveness to reset the pattern. They cannot rely on your emotional availability to regulate their distance. Your silence now communicates, I am no longer available for half love. And the most powerful part is that you do not need to announce it. You need to understand that self-respect feels lonely at first. It feels unfamiliar. It feels like standing still while your old habits try to pull you back. You will want to check their page. You will want to see if they noticed. You will want to know if they miss you. But self-respect whispers something stronger than curiosity. It whispers, my peace matters more than my need to know. And that whisper becomes strength. Because when your energy is rooted in self-respect, you stop trying to control outcomes. You stop trying to manage how they perceive you. You stop trying to craft the perfect reaction. You let your silence speak. You let your absence settle. You let the consequences unfold without interference. You need to understand that people feel when they no longer have emotional leverage. They feel when they can no longer trigger a reaction. They feel when the dynamic shifts from them being centered to you being centered. And when that happens, it can feel like they lost something, even if they never fully committed to it. But what they truly lost was the version of you that tolerated imbalance. And what you gained was alignment. Self-respect aligns you with your values. It aligns you with your needs. It aligns you with your truth. And when you are aligned, your energy becomes steady. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need to demand anything. You simply require consistency, and you walk away from what cannot provide it. You need to understand that this is not about power over them. It is about power within you. It is about no longer being emotionally swayed by someone else's unpredictability. It is about being so grounded in your worth that you do not feel tempted to negotiate it. And when you reach that place, your silence is no longer empty. It is full of clarity, full of strength, full of peace. It does not beg to be broken. It does not hope to be noticed. It simply exists as proof that you finally chose yourself, and that is the kind of energy that changes everything.